I-475 public input meeting. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. We do have bathrooms up in the narthex area. We also have we have a number of displays as well in the narthex area. So as you leave here, that's an area you can go to see some of the diagrams that we have. Just as an FYI for everybody, this is a recorded presentation, so that will be shown in its entirety as well as posted online. So any comments made as well as any presentation will be recorded for others to see that are not able to make it today. This presentation is about 40 to 45 minutes, give or take. So I'd ask that you hold the questions to the end so we can respect everybody's time and hopefully be able to answer a lot of questions you may have. And if you can't answer those questions, we'll open it up for a question and answer session as well as an open comment period after the presentation. So Kelsey, our PIO over there, will bring a mic around and we'll be able to do that after the presentation. There's also representatives in, I'll call it the hallway or the narthex up there, again with a lot of display boards. If you feel more comfortable talking to them or asking questions or just seeing right in front of you like what's going on and where are we at right now, feel free to go out there as well. You can submit comments either online or on the forms provided. So I believe there might be some forms over there. There's definitely some forms in that narthex area with a comment box. So we want to hear both good and bad, and if you've got some bad and some good, we want to hear that too. So please make sure you provide some comments, and that'd be greatly appreciated. So kind of getting into the presentation here, again, I want to welcome you all for being here. This is one of two presentations. The other will be at 5:30 today. We do have an open house format again in the narthex. I wanted to also thank Epworth United Methodist Church. They graciously agreed to accommodate us. They had a nice big area, and it's really, I think, worked out well with plenty of parking. So many of these projects, when you see these type of projects, they take decades and years to develop. And we feel right now is the correct time to come out and show the community and others where we are at right now. We have enough new information to share with you that can be discussed as well as questions being asked. We still don't have all the answers yet because this is a process. It does take time. We're in what we call stage 1 and stage 3 stages. But with that process, we'll be able to get more answers as we continue forward. So I just wanted to provide a brief introduction. So we have with our consultant team, the Manning & Smith Group in Trans-Systems. So with Manning & Smith, we have Jason Watson, who will be part of this presentation. Aaron Grillo, it's French, right? Okay. Aaron, and then Aaron's with Trans-Systems. Dave Geckel is with our ODOT teams, our project manager for this project. And then again, Kelsey Hoagland's the back, she's our public information officer. She's the one you see on TV quite a bit. And then we do have a number of others out there again around the room as well as in the narthex to answer the questions you have. So one of the things we heard early on in prior public meeting as well as public comments we received was the acquisition of houses. So one of the things we went back to the table and we really tasked our consultant to look and leave no stone unturned about the acquisition of houses. And we want to reduce, if not eliminate those. Right? I'm proud to report today and have to report today that we will not be acquiring any houses with this project. That does not mean we will not have to take That does not mean we won't have to take some strip takes or construction easements. Construction easements are typical of a lot of our projects, and then temporary construction easements or, again, strip takes. So that's something I'm pleased to report on. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. There we go. Yeah. And then I also wanted to talk about different committees we have. So we have 2 different committees now. There'll be actually other committees developed as we progress. But the main committees are the steering committee and the stakeholders group. So the steering committee is generally people that could have a financial contribution in the project or represent a financial contribution in the project or touching their system. So when you actually look at a lot of it's government agencies or it is also TMACOG, which is the Toledo Metropolitan Area Council of Governments, which is our MPO for both Wood County and Lucas County. So that's the steering committee, and then we have a stakeholders group. And what the stakeholders group is, it's entities, we're trying to represent the community as much as possible, So there's a lot of entities, elected officials that are elected on by the community. That could be city council members, they could be township trustees, the county engineer, the county commissioners, mayor's office. But those are the kind of elected officials I'm probably missing. A few state legislators would be on that as well. And we also have other government agencies, again, Metro Parks, police department, fire department, TARDA, library, things like that. We also have businesses along this area, so the Chamber of Commerce would be on there, healthcare, because again, and then one of the big things is actually, a perfect example where we're sitting now, there's a lot of churches on that. So churches and houses of worship are very much ingrained in the community, so we have invited those folks, which are generally pastors or priests, to be part of the stakeholders group. Now, having said that, we might not have included everybody in that stakeholders group. So one thing we ask is we have a list of the stakeholders group. We have one at the table, actually. Allie is the blue shirt out there. She's sitting at the table. She has a list, so if you want to check and make sure one of those organizations that you belong to is on there, please check. Please make sure we have the right contact info. We try to get that updated as much as possible. As you know, there's a lot of people on that list, and we could use your help to do that. The other thing we wanted to make sure is if there's any other organizations that you see or feel in this area that should be on that list, we're more than happy to have them on that list. So please do have that contact info, email address, or even if you just get us a phone number, if maybe they're not here today, a phone number and a name, we'd be happy to add them to that list. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with the presentation. Again, thanks for coming today, and please make sure you visit the Narthex on your way out if you haven't been there already. So thank you very much for coming.
All right, thank you, Pat. As Pat mentioned, my name is Jason Watson, and Smith Group, and we are designing the corridor managing the next developments on the corner here. So a brief overview of the agenda for today. The audience member welcome introductions. Thanks everybody for being here. And I gotta remember to keep this mic close to my face so that you guys can hear me better. Project location and history is something we're going to talk about, how we got to where we are today. Go over the limits of the project, the history, 475 collectively, as well as the purpose and need, or the why. So that is part of the what we call the NEPA assignment, part of the National Environmental Policy Act, and ODOT's responsibility to provide the why. And the reason why we are here today is to improve the congestion and safety through the project corridor. The next thing we'll talk about are the project considerations. So at this point, the project is nearing the end of its useful life. Designed and built in the 1960s, the entire corridor. So we got to start looking at what those next steps are. This is an opportunity for us to remove or update the pavement and update the corridor and the facilities. Following that, we'll talk about the proposed alternatives that we reviewed, not only through the draft feasibility study, but as we progress into this first phase of design. And next, we'll hit on those proposed alternatives and the next steps. We'll talk about what the schedule looks like and where we're moving forward from here. And then we'll open up to questions and wrap up for the day. And again, we're trying to keep that within 30 minutes to 40 minutes for everyone. So, a little background on the project location. This is I-475 from the west end, just east of the US 23 Systems Interchange, over to the east, just west of Douglas Road, for a little over 4.5 miles of interstate reconstruction. And a couple other details associated with the project are the multiple interchanges within the limits. That includes the Systems Interchange at US 23, the full interchange at Secor Road, and the partial interchanges at Quarry Road, Talmadge Road, and Monroe Street. In addition to those interchanges, we're also looking at the structures or bridges throughout the corridor. That will be the Norfolk Southern Railroad Bridge over 475 just west of Holland, Sylvania. Also includes Holland, Sylvania, Iowa River Bridges, and Woodley, Rushland, and Bowen. So that balances out all three bridges. Those would all be new as part of this project. As we move to the next phase, a little bit more about the project history. So as Pat mentioned, this has been under study for decades. In 2002, Team McCog procured a study for what the future holds for 475. That includes all the way around the Toledo metropolitan area. And that study culminated in a follow-up strategic plan developed by ODOT in 2006. This study looked at every element from the south end of 475, that's the 75 interchange, up through around US 23 to back to 75 on the north side. And what that study did is to prioritize the improvements, including the section between US 23 and Douglas. And a little bit of background is these projects are developed in what we call segments of independent utility, so that they can operate independently and fit within a budget. So all of these projects that you see on the screen to the right were developed with that in mind. So project A, B, and C, which you all have seen under construction and completed for projects A and B in the last few years, project C, which is currently under construction, are a culmination of that strategic plan. And one of the final links is this segment that we're here to talk about today, which is the 475 East-West Corridor Improvement Project. Now, the elements associated with this project culminated in a feasibility study in 2020. You'll notice that there's a PID, or Project Identification Number 108778. This is the unique Social Security number for each project. So each project gets their unique identifier, and ODOT looks at projects in different phases. So this feasibility study was developed as part of a planning phase project. And the next phase would take us into design, which is the East-West project, and we'll go into more detail on that in a little bit. But what this feasibility study did is it detailed the elements of 475 between US 23 and Douglas Road. It evaluated a no-build scenario as well as multiple third lane build options. There was a public meeting held back in August of 2020. Those elements were included, responses were included with the final study that you can see the title sheet here in November of 2020. Now, one of the results from that study and the information provided in there led to due to cost impact, led to the removal of the full interchange in Talmadge Road. So the Talmadge Road interchange that you see today will have a very similar configuration as part of this project. In other words, we'll have just a westbound exit ramp and an eastbound entrance ramp. There will be no new ramps on the west side of that interchange as part of this project. As we move forward, a little bit more detail about the background of where we're today with this improvement project. Again, that's under PID 115418, and that further examines alternatives from the 2020 draft feasibility study. So we're taking it a step further. We're reviewing specific areas for additional study, which include locations like Quarry Road, Talmadge Road, and Seaport. If you were upstairs, you saw the slides and boards that were up there that outline some of the potential alternatives that we're looking at, and we're looking for your feedback on that information. And then we also want to move forward with that recommended preferred alternative should provide the following: hit the purpose and need, reduce congestion, and improve safety. And we'll go into more detail on that here, and we'll explain that in more detail as we move forward. Provide better multimodal access on bridges. And by multimodal, we mean pedestrian, sidewalks, multi-use paths, bike lanes, and potential other site treatments that Aaron will talk about a little bit further. And by doing that, we'll reconnect communities on both sides of 475, give better pedestrian access, and bridge improvements, aesthetic treatments, and be consistent throughout the corridor. New noise walls, again, as needed, where you may have seen some folks out in the field taking some noise studies here the last few weeks. And then lastly, to minimize residential impacts. As we talked about before, the why, the project, the purpose, and need, I'd now like to hand it over to Aaron to explain that a little bit more.
Thanks, Jason. So I gotta work out my logistics logistics here to make sure we've got on the same page as well. So as Jason was mentioning, each project has what's called a purpose and need statement. And as he alluded to, for this particular project, it's really focusing on the why of the project, which is to reduce congestion and look for opportunities to improve safety for the traveling public. And what I'm going to do is walk through a few slides that talk both about congestion and safety, as well as the point that Jason made about opportunities to reconnect the communities on both sides of 475. So with that, I'm going to go into a little bit of information talking about traffic. And I know when I was upstairs, I was fielding some questions from a few of you about the traffic out in this area. On the right side of this slide, you'll see what's called a permanent counter, a permanent traffic count station. This is located just to the east of the Woodley Bridge, if you're traveling westbound on 475. And this went into operation in 2008. So prior to that, ODOT had, I guess we'll call it kind of less reliable means to gather consistent traffic data in this area. But since 2008, they've had this station in place that counts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So they've been able to constantly monitor traffic through this stretch of 475. And by using that information combined with some other counts along each of the interchanges, they can get a pretty accurate feel for what the traffic levels are between each of the interchanges along this corridor. So as an example, we pulled some information through the month of August that's highlighted here on the slide. And you'll see when you monitor traffic throughout the week, throughout the month, it does vary. So on a Sunday in August, we had a low volume of about 60,000 vehicles in a single day. But then there was also a Friday where that volume exceeded 93,000 vehicles. So when we talk about average daily traffic, it's averaging those highs and those lows throughout the course of the entire year. So just understand there will be spikes that are higher, and obviously time periods when it's lower as well. So with that, I'm going to bring up this slide here. So this blue dot that you see on the screen, this is representative of that permanent count station that I was mentioning. And you've got a traffic count here of a little over 74,000 vehicles. So this was from the year 2022, so last year. That was that average over the course of the year. And then if you look along the corridor, apologies here for turning my back to you. You'll see over at Monroe, that volume was higher. It was over 81,000. And then around Secor, where you've got the traffic getting on and off of the freeway, it's going to be a little bit lower between those ramps. So it's about 72,000. And then as we move further to the west, you might be curious why this volume is so much lower between Talmadge and Corey. About 56,000. Well, if you think about the way those ramps are configured, you've got traffic getting on and off to and from the west at Corey, and then similarly on and off to and from the east at Talmadge. So there's nobody getting on 475 in between those two crossroads. So that's why it's a lower volume there. You kind of have to think of that as one interchange if you kind of push all those ramps together. But then if we look over here to the west, this is approaching the US 23 Systems Interchange. You'll see that volume then increases up to a little over 67,000 vehicles per day. So again, you can kind of see how that traffic fluctuates along the corridor. But again, we feel pretty good about those volumes just based on this permanent count station that we're able to draw data from. And as a point of reference, seeing these ranges from say, 60 to 80 or so thousand, this is very consistent to other segments of 475 and 75 in the area, which have already been widened to say, 3 or 4 lanes in each direction, whereas we just have 2 lanes in this particular area. So hopefully I can do a good job of walking you through the color coding on this exhibit here. What this information represents is something we call level of service, and it's basically intended to kind of give everybody a visual of the amount of congestion during the peak periods. So this is representative of the existing number of lanes that are out there, but it's looking into the future at the year 2045. So typically for projects of this scale, we do traffic planning to look out into the future. So in this case, it's about 22 years from now to make sure that we're not only looking at today's conditions, but also what those conditions would be like in the future. So where we see green on this, think of a traffic light, green is go, red is stop. So those green areas are representative of areas with little to no congestion, basically free flow conditions. Where we see red, that would be the most congested areas. So here that's largely between Talmadge and Secor. And then those yellow and orange locations are indicative of some breakdowns in peak periods where traffic's not going to be able to as freely maneuver and change lanes along the corridor. So other than this segment over here on the far right of the screen, for the most part, we're seeing some level of congestion throughout those peak periods. And then this graphic here is intended to represent the future condition where an extra lane would be added onto the freeway. So again, looking at year 2045, you'll see that the majority of the corridor turns green. So we've largely eliminated those areas that were yellow and eliminated all of the red and the orange segments as well. So that kind of concluded the discussion of the congestion. I wanted to hit a little bit on some of the safety. And I know Jason will talk about some safety elements as well as it relates to the roadway design itself. But I'm going to highlight just a couple of other items that we thought were of interest here. So just looking at reported crashes. So these are crash reports that are filed, with a police officer or state patrol over a 3-year period from 2019 to 2021. And we recognize this includes 2020 during COVID when traffic levels were lower and crashes were obviously lower during that time period as well because there were fewer vehicles on the road. But during that 3-year period, there were 295 reported crashes. A number of those were either rear end, side swipe, or fixed object. Typically that's indicative of some sort of breakdown conditions. If somebody's slowing in front of you, you have a rear end or trying to change lanes. 24% of those, nearly 300 crashes, resulted in some type of injury or fatality. But in addition to those reported crashes, there are many other incidents that aren't necessarily documented in terms of a crash report. And one of those measures that I wanted to talk about are the Geico service patrol vehicles. If you see them out circulating, anytime there's a vehicle breakdown, in a lane or on a shoulder, and one of those vehicles is responding to, help attend to that vehicle. Over the last 2 years, there were more than 1,300 incidents just within our project area, due to those service patrols. And what's interesting is to see that those incidents, just like other crashes or traffic congestion, also lead to delays for the traveling public. So over those last 2 years, those 1,300 incidents added an additional 35 hours of vehicular delay for the traveling public in the area. And this graphic here is something that we call a heat map. It's really just intended to help visualize where those reported crashes are concentrated. So the locations in yellow, those are kind of those highest concentration areas. Most of those are located in and around the interchange areas, which kind of makes sense if you think about that's where people are getting onto or off of the freeway. So there's a lot more merging and lane changing going on in those locations. So I also mentioned that we're going to talk a little bit about opportunities to reconnect the neighborhoods on each side of I-475. So Jason talked about, all of the bridges along this corridor that would be replaced in addition to the roadway improvements. And this picture on the screen here, this is from the Columbus area. This is a relatively new bridge over Interstate 71. But when you look at it, you can see that it's not your typical bridge that just has maybe a sidewalk on one or both sides of the road, but there's some other features and amenities. And what we find interesting about some of these newer bridge designs is the opportunity to create these connections where somebody that's using that bridge, whether they're driving over it, walking, riding a bicycle, they don't necessarily even realize they're going over a highway. So, as we look for your input today, that's just something we would certainly like feedback on as you're thinking about where these bridges are located and how some of the improvements to those bridges can maybe help encapsulate some of the ideas you might see in this image here to, again, really give people that feeling of trying to reconnect from one side of the interstate to the other. So with that, Jason, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks again, Aaron. To continue on with our discussion, I wanted to get into what led us to where we're at, the project considerations. So an overview of the current conditions is that I-475 within this segment between 23 and Douglas contains 2 lanes for the most part. So at the west end, as you enter from the US 23 Systems Interchange, we transition to 2 lanes to the east all the way to Monroe. And at Monroe, it does transition back to 3 lanes to align with the remainder of 475 as it approaches the 75 interchange. So the rest of the corridor as well, with those upgrades you've seen in the previous graphic with projects A, B, and C, that's all been upgraded to 3 lanes. Built in the 1960s, and this project is becoming outdated. Standards, ramp lengths, curves, and that's been through the process of investigation and learning through the Federal Highway Administration. So over time, as we've refined data, some of those elements related to the requirements that we're held to have been updated. So currently, you'll see in the next photo that there are substandard conditions. So primarily the median shoulder or the inside shoulder on 475 in this segment. And then ultimately, the roadway needs to be rebuilt. The pavement's past at the end of its useful life. The subgrade, which is the underlying strength of the pavement, is original to the project from the 1960s. And so we'll begin to see increased deterioration of the pavement. And this is our opportunity to upgrade the facilities to, again, meet the current standards, and then also provide the space necessary to eliminate those deficiencies. So on this next slide here, you'll see that we have a view. It may be a little difficult to see, but and excuse me while I do this, but in this photo here, you can see this photo was taken just a couple days ago. The shoulder and the median, that's pretty tight with the bridge approach. You don't see a vehicle here, but as you approach there, you can barely make it out there. There's a car ahead. So if you're traveling at a high rate of speed and that car was disabled off into the shoulder, that's substandard, that car would be hanging out into the lane. That's part of that, the 1,300 incidents, the traffic congestion, the rear end accidents that are caused on a consistent basis. Again, Aaron mentioned that the majority of those accidents on this corridor are that side swipe rear end, which is indicative of high congestion. Next, just to touch on a few other project considerations, public input. So up to 2020, we considered the comments received, and as part of that public outreach that was included in the November 2020 feasibility study. As time has continued, as we go into today, we've launched websites such as our publicinput.com website, fielded your phone calls and emails, have provided responses where necessary, and have been logging that information. The next step is incorporating interchange improvements. So, as I mentioned, current design criteria would necessitate improvements to those interchanges. That includes wider, longer acceleration length at the ramps, giving vehicular traffic the opportunity to anticipate oncoming traffic and more readily merge in with oncoming traffic. And then the focus of minimizing right-of-way and property impacts. Our priority has been to do that throughout this project. ODOT, in conjunction with the City of Toledo, has come up with alternatives that have tightened up the original proposed Talmadge interchange that was presented back in 2020. This avoids any total residential takes within the corridor, and would continue to prioritize those impacts. And as Aaron and we mentioned a little bit earlier, there still may be a need for some what we call strip takes, minor takes, permanent takes for items such as retaining walls and barriers, and there may be a temporary easement to do and perform construction activities. And then, as we mentioned, we are avoiding total residential takes with these changes and updates. Next, oops, the wrong button there. We are following the NEPA process through this. As Aaron discussed, the purpose and need. Other components of that process include noise. Again, you may have seen some representatives out taking noise readings. We're analyzing through field analysis the current noise levels throughout the corridor according to the FHWA guidelines, and we'll continue to assess and study that information. Once we have recommendations and information developed, we'll be conducting another public involvement meeting specific to noise barriers and the discussion around that, and that is scheduled to occur in early 2024. So we'll continue to head that way. Other elements of the NEPA process include air quality, Section 106, which is historic properties and archaeological sites, so we'll be doing investigations associated with that. RMR, regulated material review, so as we approach or maybe get near some gas stations or if there's any landfills, we'll be analyzing those areas. And then lastly, ecological, so the project does go through or over the Iowa River and adjacent to Wildwood Preserve, so we'll be sensitive to those areas, which include wetlands, streams, sensitive species, and taking the appropriate actions if any are discovered. And as we mentioned, we are early in this process, so many of these activities are yet to begin or are just beginning. So as we continue to move forward, we'll keep you updated on the progress of those items. As we mentioned in the 2020 study, we built upon that with this latest feasibility study that we're procuring. The current feasibility study actually analyzed 3 alternatives. One included the full ODOT criteria, which is the standards put forth for 3 12-foot lanes, 10-foot shoulders, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. We also reviewed what's called hard shoulder running. This is a scenario that has a part-time lane, so to speak, so the inside shoulder would be over-widened, and then during times of peak travel, such as the AM rush hour or the PM rush hour, that lane would go active through signage. You can see that if you've ever been out in Columbus on I-670, they have overhead signs that change based on traffic demands and volumes. That was an element that was considered. And then lastly, we looked at what's called performance-based project development. This is just an approach to see if we can be as aggressive as we can with those design standards allotted to us to try to reduce the footprint. And ultimately, through the analysis of those 3 alternatives, we are recommending that we move forward with the alternative 1, the full ODOT criteria, as that alternative outweighed the other 2 alternatives for various reasons. And then what we'd like to also mention is that within the corridor at Quarry Road, there's a posted speed change. West of Quarry Road, the posted speed is 65 miles an hour, and east of Quarry Road, the posted speed is 60 miles an hour, all the way to the 75 interchange. We did want to clarify that the posted speed will remain unchanged as we move forward in the design of this project. Now a little bit more about the full ODOT criteria alternative. So to talk about ODOT design criteria standards, there are federal requirements that we're held to when we design an interstate. Those requirements have us lay out the lanes according to certain distances or offsets. And the lanes throughout this corridor would be 12 foot, that's a interstate standard in width, and then we have 10 foot minimum shoulders. We do have areas that would be widened up to 14 feet to accommodate sight distance. I showed you that slide earlier with sight distance, and to meet all those standards, we have areas that would have wide shoulders. All of that is laid out in an effort to remain within the existing right-of-way. And then, most importantly, are those ramp standards. Currently, many of the ramps that are out there, again, designed and built in the 1960s, while they met design standards back in the 1964 design manual, throughout the history of the Federal Highway Administration and through research, those standards have been updated according to research, and so those elements would be incorporated into this project. So you'd have a longer distance to merge with traffic, a wider distance, and that will give you the ability to look over your shoulder and look at that traffic that's coming up behind you or beside you and be able to merge more easily. Next, a little bit more about the full ODOT criteria alternative. So it meets the purpose and need. It meets the project needs to reduce congestion and increase safety. 3 lanes provide existing traffic volumes and future conditions. So everything that we do, we are forecasting to 2045 traffic volumes. So we look ahead 20 plus years when we analyze these facilities. This also provides an opportunity to correct those design deficiencies I talked about. So think about those substandard shoulders on the median, increase to 1,300 incidents that we've seen in the last couple of years. And then that would also allow the ability to any disabled vehicles to pull in the median shoulder and be out of the way through traffic. It would allow emergency services to have a refuge area to handle those types of incidents, and that would provide, again, better congestion, reduce those incidents, and get that ability to reduce those conflict points. We're also matching existing conditions at both ends of the corridor. So to the east, your ProMedica Parkway, for example, that's 3 lanes in each direction, and with the recent upgrades and reconstruction 475 in and around US 23 and to the south, that's all 3 lanes, so that would be consistent. That would help with driver expectancy. You know, you're not coming up 3 lanes like you are today with Monroe, and all of a sudden you see there's an exit, you got to jump over. You would be able to continue straight and then diverge, get off of Monroe, for example. This also meets all the criteria for the 3-lane layout. I think we've gone over that a couple of times. And then widen that median shoulder to prevent sight distance and space for emergency services. One last element that I would like to discuss with everyone is the approach to auxiliary lanes. Auxiliary lanes are essentially a connection between 2 adjacent interchanges. So you may have, for example, Talmadge interchange, get on westbound, you merge with through traffic, and then you get off at Talmadge westbound, and you're merging with through traffic. With an auxiliary lane, it would be a continuous lane connecting the 2 exit and entrance ramps. And if you're going from Talmadge from Seaport to Talmadge, you would never have to merge with through traffic. So that would reduce the confliction points. And we are proposing to do that between Talmadge and Seaport, both in the westbound and eastbound directions. And one thing that we'd like to point out, there's a very similar situation today between ProMedica Parkway and Douglas westbound. there's a dedicated auxiliary lane there for the same reason that we applied here. Most importantly, this scenario would not require additional right-of-way. We have analyzed this layout, and with the inclusion of some short retaining walls and some other elements, we would avoid any need for right-of-way. But that's about all I have today. I would like to hand it over to Dave Geckel so that he can talk to you about some more of the next steps on the project as we continue to move forward.
All right, thanks, Jason. Again, going forward, so in the middle of 2023, we have a amended feasibility study that's approved. We are very early on in the process. We have a lot of design work left to do, a lot of final design work left to do. We're still working with alignment and things like that. We don't know the answers to all the overhead overpasses and interchanges, so we're working through all that. But what we're doing is we're analyzing those alternatives. Today we're here for an informational public meeting. Again, we're looking at the interchanges, and not only at Talmadge, Corey, Secor, but also Monroe Street. Then we're continuing on through the NEPA process, and we are very early on in the NEPA process, so there's not a lot of final information that's available. But again, going forward in the spring of 2024, we will have another public meeting. We will be able to present the recommended preferred alternative at that time. Then through 24 and 25, we'll continue to refine our design. And then the fall of 26, we'll probably be getting close to right-of-way acquisition process. Again, we do not plan on total takes of any residential properties. We may need strip takes along some areas to be able to construct what we need to construct, but other than that, there will be no total takes. And then at this time, we're looking at construction in 2027. So that's kind of tentatively our schedule going forward. Advance my slides here. Okay, and with that, I just want to thank everybody for coming. That was our formal presentation. I want to thank the Epworth United Methodist Church for hosting us today. Thanks Pat, Jason, and Aaron for their presentation. And with that, we're going to open it up to questions. Kelsey's going to be kind of moderator, and we will be able to answer your questions. If we don't have the answers to your questions, hopefully somebody in this building does. We might have to track them down, so we might have to skip over it for a little bit, but we will try to get your answers to your questions as we go forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey.
Thank you very much. And so the gentlemen at the table do have a microphone. I am going to do my best to come to those who raise their hand. I've already seen a number of them. So I'm going to just work my way backwards. But sir, would you like to go ahead with the first question?
Thank you much. My name is Tom. I'm with the group of neighbors that's opposed to widening the two doors from the 475 lumber, I believe. And some of the questions that I've had, you've answered, I appreciate it. But I particularly wanted to talk about alternatives. So I have 5 case studies here from cities about the size of Toledo. I'm going to leave it in your comment box, because when you talk about alternatives, I'm wondering if you could just walk me through the process. You said you had 3 build alternatives and decided on the ODOT process, with the ODOT alternative. And then you mentioned that in 2024 you're going to have a public meeting where you'll present the preferred design. I'm concerned that the residents won't have the input on alternatives to your preferred design, and that by the time it gets to the public meeting, all the decisions have been made. So I guess twofold question. What went into you going through the 3 build alternatives and deciding what you did? And would you commit to making sure that our neighborhood is truly the stakeholder in further planning?
So how we kind of plan this is that, of course, they are different subject matter experts, so they're going to each identify who might be best suited to answer questions. So Tom, that's how we're getting to this point.
Okay, so I guess I'll take the stakeholder part first, and if I miss something, just make sure you get reminded. So with the stakeholder part, again, we try to be as representative of the community. So again, we would like to get, if there's other groups or anybody else out there, we have the list, they're sitting out there. Just please review that list, and hopefully we can utilize that input going forward. As far as the build alternatives, and then there's a no build alternative as well, usually with these, is we do look to address the purpose and need statement. And with that purpose and need statement, that's how we kind of identify and narrow down a build. I will say that you're always kind of, I mean, I would argue you're always identifying some alternatives going forward, even with aesthetics and things like that, and continue on. So that part of that process would be utilizing those committees. And there could be other committees too, like the aesthetics committee, a lot of times with projects like this, which we would be happy to have members of, find members for those committees going forward.
And then to answer your question about the alternatives that we've studied, so going up to the 2020 study, again, congestion was the primary driver with respect to that and to improve safety. So those accidents that we've seen are indicative of congestion. So in order to alleviate that and then to be consistent with the remainder of the corridor, we analyzed a third lane option. And every option we did look at included a third lane to address the congestion. That segment during peak hour is over capacity. So when a driver, for example, is approaching that segment of 475, I mentioned Monroe, you have a lane, what we call lane drop. So there's a dedicated lane that exits Monroe on the westbound side. And what we've seen oftentimes is folks are in their lane, suddenly realize they have to exit, but they don't want to exit. So they slide over right through the core area and approach where the roadway divides. And by adding a third lane, situations like that would be alleviated. That exit lane will have a dedicated, what we call deceleration lane, so that traffic will be able to get off safely and, you know, at least reduce those types of incidents throughout the corridor. And then by lengthening the acceleration lanes for the ramps and deceleration for those ramps, it will give those drivers that are merging and diverging more opportunity to see what's going on beside them before they make that decision to move and get up to speed before they do that.
Thank you. So I do know that there are a number of people who have a whole notepad of questions. What I'm hoping that we can do, we have multiple questions, is limit it to a couple. And then once we have a chance to get through everyone who has questions, you can come back and answer more questions. So with that, I will extend the invitation to you.
I don't even. US 23 southbound, you keep referring to it as 3 lanes. It's only southbound 3 lanes from central to south. From Michigan line down to Toledo and from 475, 23 westbound going north is 2 lanes in both directions. When you show your little slide out there with congestion, there's a lot of 23, 10,000 vehicles coming on Coy Road. I don't know where the accidents occur, because you don't say where in 4 miles. Wherever they are in 4 miles, that's important. Okay, you guys talk about congestion and safety, they go hand in hand. In some cases they do, but I'm still not sure if it's like the car count, okay, versus the number of lanes. So if you have 70,000 vehicles going through it, they have 2 lanes, it's not good enough. That's what they have, about 17,000. Okay? Anyway, there's a lot of missing, is what I'm saying. You guys say that we don't want to take any full properties. And what about commercial properties? What about independent, small businesses? Okay? You say that you don't want to take a full tax flow. Put it right. Okay? I hear a lot of vague generalities. I don't hear a lot of specifics. All right? The other thing is if you do widen it, you're going to increase truck traffic going to the terminal. So that's where because they're going to, rather than go straight down 75, you're going to cut 12 miles off their toll. Okay? I got more, but I have a whole page. I'll leave it at that. Okay?
Thank you for your comment, and I just want to make sure that there were no specific questions right this moment. Okay, I see that I've got a participant who is coming to the microphone. I'll meet you at your seat, but I'd be glad to take your question.
Hi, my name is Kenny Bailey Mastinette. I am the coordinator of the I-475 Neighborhoods Coalition. We have opposed this project since 2020, and we continue to oppose it for a plethora of reasons. The first thing I'd like to say is that everybody needs to know this is definitely not a public hearing. Public hearings are conducted by elected officials. They have to vote on the project, and I'd like to know, this is rhetorical, what was the last project in the city of Toledo that was $186 million, and frankly, I believe it's much more than that, but I'll stay there, $186 million that was not subject to public hearing. So this is not a public hearing, it is a public relations event. None of the folks who are here are elected officials, they are not accountable to the voters, and I believe that we should have public hearings on such a significant project. My question is this, I'll take your idea that you're going to go with your preferred alternative. There's no guarantee that that's going to be it. But pardon me, the I-475 Neighborhoods Coalition has studied your data at your website. This is a packet of materials that will support many of the questions that are going to be asked today. I also have a USB drive. We held a public meeting. We allowed citizens to come to the microphone and say what it was that they opposed about the project. We had 3 public meetings actually, and in all 3 meetings with over 100 people attending each, only 1 person spoke in favor of your plan. So I have this to present, Kelsey, this and this, that will support. It's data straight up right out of your website. It's not, most of it is not what we created. None of your expansion plans, which you claim are needed based on safety, will make the highway safer. Just the opposite. No matter which of the 3 alternatives you have studied, according to the analytics by your own consulting engineer, the expansion will increase the number of fatalities and injuries. The engineer's analytics pages have been duplicated in that material and are found on pages 11 through 18 of our presentation. I also took those numbers and plugged them into a spreadsheet and calculated these numbers. So, those analytics show an increase in fatalities and incapacitating injuries of between 13 and 29%. An increase in serious yet non-incapacitating injuries of 4 to 21%, and an increase in other injuries by up to 18%, excuse me. ODOT is a participant in a frequently reconvened Ohio Strategic Highway Safety Plan. You and the other participants have set a goal of 2% yearly reduction in these crashes. And while you're designing a highway which is increasing fatalities and serious injuries, none of the alternatives you study are safer, not the widening with wider shoulders, not the widening using narrower shoulder distance, and not the hard shoulder running alternative. Yet you keep insisting that an unsafe expansion is the only alternative, and frankly, when Tom started the race, there are alternatives around the country that are not widening. They are actually removing highways or capping highways and creating economic development. Why does ODOT insist on building an unsafe highway?
Thank you for your question, Peggy. And so that is the Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try to address some of that, and I'll pass it to some other folks too as well. So when we look at these highway systems, we look at congestion, we look at efficiencies. Again, when you look at the heat map, you're seeing around the ramps. I can tell you when I use that area, it dumps you onto the highway pretty quick. I mean, I think we can probably, most of us will agree with that. But it dumps you on the highway pretty quick. That's your points where you're having some issues. Those are the deficiencies. So we need to address those. We need to do a rebuild of the interstate as well, but we also need to take care of issues for stopped vehicles. We need to take care of issues for police and fire. But we need to address some of these issues, but we also have congestion issues as well, which is indicative of some of the things that you're seeing out there. So when we looked at 475, 75 loop around Toledo, we've made upgrades to 75 all the way from Finley all the way to the Michigan line. 475, we've seen that improved, and we're actually working on an improvement from US 24 up to Airport Highway. From Airport Highway to Central, that's already been improved along with the New Door Street interchange. So we're addressing these issues to try to take care of these for the long term. And so now this area, this one area that we were looking at, quite frankly, it's been looked at since 2002 in those studies. And we've seen these improvements have made this area more economically viable, but they've also addressed a number of issues of congestion and other things. But I'm going to let them talk a little bit more about specifics, but I'll leave my comments at that.
Thanks, Pat. And I appreciate the question from the audience regarding safety.
Please express the analytics in your own app.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all of these projects, it is an evolution over time, and so I know exactly what you're referring to. There is an analytical tool that ODOT has available where you can basically pull in all of your traffic and safety data, and it does some predictive calculations. And that is something that was included in the amended feasibility study. And I know that there are some slight increases in those injury and fatality statistics. There are overall reductions in the total number of crashes on the corridor. However, there's constantly more and more research and data that goes into those tools. And that's something that we're aware of, and we'll be refining that as we go forward along with the design to make sure that the end product that we're looking at, putting on the street does not do as you're concerned with in terms of increasing those injury or fatalities along the stretch of roadways. So again, we're aware of that. It's been a preliminary assessment that we've done. It's included in the report, and we're continuing to do more research and refinement on those calculations to make sure that it does lead us in the direction that we think it should intuitively. Now, I will say on top of those calculations, there were a number of other factors that we also talked about in terms of sight lines, acceleration distances, vehicle breakdowns. All of that information goes into those overall calculations and assessments that we do for a project of this scale. So it's not just one piece of data, it's holistically making sure we're taking account all of that information in that decision-making process.
Thanks, Aaron. I know that we have a question right here.
I wanted to know, with coming back another lane and everything you have to it and moving the wall, how many feet is that going to be into the yards that we already have?
In most cases, you're not going to see a difference. We are staying within the existing right-of-way. There will be areas where we do need to take what we call strip takes, which is a small portion of a property for a permanent condition. We are very early on in the phase, and we're continuing to refine it and try to continue to reduce and minimize those impacts. I wish I had more of a concrete answer for you, but again, as we move forward, we're continuing to refining those alignments and geometrics, similar to what Aaron discussed with the traffic, as we continue to get updated information in the review process. So we are keyed in on a couple areas right now where we're looking to refine those more specifically, but at this point, it's very minimal in terms of overall impact.
Yeah, because where I live right now, there's a lot of noise the way it is right now. And what do you think is going to do to the value of our homes if this goes through? If there's a wall practically in your backyard.
Thank you. We do see these noise walls being implemented on projects that we have had throughout our corridor, and I do wonder if there is information specifically available, but there has not been a correlation that we have specifically drawn. We would like to look into that more for you. Thank you very much. I did promise that I'd go over this direction. Did you still want to ask your question? Did you?
Hello. I happen to be 86 years old, having trouble standing up. I got a bad knee, haven't had it operated on yet. But, I've had a lot of travel around the country and around the world. I had a recent experience that fits this confession right now. I was recently in Columbus visiting my 6th grade grandchildren, and on the way back, driving with my son-in-law, who I don't like to ride with, when the road was 2 lanes and 60 miles an hour, he was driving 70. And he was only 3 or 4 car lengths behind trucks. Meanwhile, he was being passed in the outer lane by people who were doing more than 70. Now the other problem was we got on the highway and there was 3 lanes. Well, good for that. So what? The speed limit now was 70. And so he's driving 80. And people are still passing him in the outer lanes. You said you're going to maintain the 60 mile an hour speed limit. Who the hell is going to enforce it? The other thing is, if you're traveling at those rates of speed, I know a little bit about physics. I have some personal experience in working on expressways. I was the foreman on the job to put the lights on 475 between Corey and the Interstate 23. I was the foreman on that project. So I know a little about highway construction too. But the other problem becomes that when you're doing this kind of stuff, you get that speed limit going, who's going to enforce it? Improve the safety. Well, I'm not sure that it's all that much improved, because when the people are doing the 60, 70, 80 mile an hour thing, if there is a crash, there is more likely to be serious injuries rather than casual injuries. So at 50 mile an hour, you might have a broken arm, but at 75 and 80 mile an hour, you're dead. And so if you're not going to enforce the speed limit, I think the speed limit ought to go slower. The other day, watching the merge from 2-3 lanes by ProMedica down to 2 lanes, traffic was slowing down and trying to get into that second lane. I thought that was a wonderful thing, because going slower, they will be injured less. So I don't see any need to make that a 3-way highway. There's no real need for it. Only twice a day, morning and night, only 5 days a week is when the congestion occurs. And during that couple of hours, those people can give up a few minutes and go at 60 miles an hour rather than drive at 70 and 80 miles an hour. So thank you for your time. And please do a better job of designing these highways in the future so they have more life. As I traveled around the world and walked on the Great Wall of China and on the Appian Way from Rome, they're still there. They still work. They're still being used. Why every 10 years do you have to tear out a bridge and put in a new one?
So I had a couple of questions there, a couple of different comments as well, but one of the pieces I think that we most heard was the concern about the speed limit and enforcement. One of the things that I think was briefly mentioned during the presentation, and I'll let these gentlemen reiterate, but was the shoulder spacing. And right now there actually is, even we hear from our emergency response partners often, whether that be police or fire and EMS, that there is not adequate shoulder space to even pull someone over. So that is a big concern that we hear about our shoulder widths. I don't know if anybody wanted to expand on that as far as the safety improvement from that aspect.
Okay, here we go. So I'll touch a little bit on the enforcement issue. I mean, we as ODOT, we don't enforce the speed limit. We let that to our enforcement partners, the local police departments, and highway patrol. I will say that we did talk to the highway patrol about speed enforcement on this section of 475, and the biggest concern is that there is no area to pull over, for them to pull over to clock speeders. And then also, in addition to that, if they would pull somebody over, the shoulders are shown so narrow and the traffic is so heavy that it actually causes traffic backups. So they're kind of reluctant to enforce the speed in this area, which we think that with our future project of widening the 3 lanes and decreasing the shoulder widths, that will actually help out their situation, and we actually might have a better enforcement going forward. So that's a little bit of the enforcement issue, and I don't know if we need to answer some more questions that you need answered on that comment, or
Well, it seems to me with the technology available today, you can talk to somebody on my cell phone over in Europe.
I guess I won't give you ODOT's position, but I'll tell you why, though. I would highly suggest you talk to your General Assemblyman or woman about that issue. Because that is actually an Ohio Revised Code issue, and I think in some states, again, I can tell you from ODOT's perspective, we would love to see that, especially in our work zones. Getting back to what you said before, sir, about our workers in areas, like they do a very dangerous job out there. And ODOT's position is, and I think the governor's as well, is to try to, we'd love to see that in work zones, because those are our people out there, it's the contractors out there, things like that. But as of now, that would take a legislative change in order for that to happen.
Thank you, and I'm going to go ahead here. We've got a question up front, and I'll come back to you, okay? All right.
Yes, my name is Wallace John. I just moved over this area about a year ago, and I live right at the exit of Talmadge Road, and the 17th exit, and also right behind the 475 East. So I'm right at the traffic when it goes east 475, and it's very, very loud. I would like to know how I know he says about barriers. I don't know how long the barriers been up, and they don't seem to be working very well. And also I like to say, I don't know what kind of study they do on decibel levels, but that's very important because it's very loud overwhelming. And also I like to just say, I think you guys got a good idea. I think this is a good idea because where I'm at is awful lot of traffic, and they do need to be addressed. Some things come with the territory, like we say, you got more people, more everything, but when we try to improve it, I'm all for it.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment. Did you want, there was any thoughts about the noise? I mean, you know, we continue to analyze the area and so the entire project corridor is undergoing analysis, even locations that do have existing noise barriers. So those areas, you might even see people out, you might have received a letter at your home that says you'll be seeing people out doing those surveying, different analysis, but the corridor is continuing to be studied and future mitigations will be implemented. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So you indicated that there were 2 fatalities between 2019 and 2021, and we've looked into that in the Neighborhood Coalition's thing. It's duplicated on pages 8 and 10 in that document. Both of those fatalities occurred in vehicles that were built without the required safety regulations which are applied to passenger vehicles. One was an SUV and the other was a truck. The contributing circumstances are a little bit vague, but neither person was wearing a seatbelt, and one of the people that died was a young driver. In both of those cases, the vehicle left the roadway with one listed as a head-on crash in a highway that has a solid median for its length. So my question, please explain to me how an additional 1 or 2 lanes would have prevented these types of fatalities.
Appreciate the comment and the information. Again, as we've talked about with wider shoulders, thinking about a more forgiving roadway for folks. And again, I don't know the specifics. Obviously, the information that we have on those incident reports is as good as the information that's recorded on site. But obviously, when you do have more recovery area, that does offer at times a driver more opportunity to perhaps recover and pull back onto the roadway. But again, I can't speak to those specific instances without probably a little bit more information. We do know, in addition to what we do from a roadway design standpoint, auto manufacturers are obviously trying to make improvements in in safety as well, and it's very much a collaborative effort. But we do have laws that require seatbelts, and so unfortunately there are going to be instances where, regardless of how well informed our motorists are or a roadway is designed, sometimes you just can't prevent certain instances from occurring. And it sounds like if those individuals weren't wearing seatbelts, again, sometimes you just can't change that outcome, unfortunately.
Those were 2 deaths in a 3-year period, that's it. And you were saying that the major driver for this is safety, and I'm calling BS on that.
Like I said, appreciate the comment, and again, as we, I think, communicated through the presentation today, we have those reported incidents, of which those 2 fatalities are part of it. But again, it goes beyond that. It's also looking at those geometric and safety features along the corridor, as well as thinking about the Geico service patrols. All those other incidents that aren't necessarily documented in a police report are all factors that come into consideration when we're thinking about overall motorist safety.
Look at the data that he is looking at right now. It's in that report. It's your report. The data is there. Supporting what she just said. So to say there's police reports, your data shows the conditions that were involved in those 2 fatalities. It's laying on the table. It doesn't need any additional police reports. It needs you to respond to the idea that adding more lanes is not going to make people wear their seatbelts. Adding more lanes is not going to prevent a head-on collision with a median down the middle. Adding more lanes is not going to prevent young drivers from doing stupid things. In fact, it may increase young drivers doing stupid things. So look at the data that's laying on the table. That's why we put it together and presented it to you.
Well, and I gave you slid that back in, but we're gonna keep on focus. I do have a next question here, and we will get back to additional questions that have already, for people who have already spoken. We will continue to get to everyone in the room. So, if you would like, sir, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Let me say this. I deeply, deeply understand the passion of those who have spoken against the project. They have raised some very fine points and information. On the other hand, I want you to know that ODOT has also, through its hard work, also raised some very good points and has given us, in my view, at least a very good foundation for considering the passage of this project. So let me say right off the bat, before I get to my main question. No one voted me, nor appointed me to represent anyone, nor like a king anointed me to speak for anyone. But I do want to thank ODOT very, very much for this fine presentation and taking the time to give us a full measure, or at least a good foundation for what this project will entail. My question is, if everything stays according to plan, anticipated construction could begin by 2027, a few years from now. So if everything would stay on track year by year, could someone give me, maybe Dave could give me this answer, when do you think the estimated time frame would be for completion of the project? Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We haven't gotten far enough along to get a good construction schedule yet. Like I said, we're very early in the process of this design, so we haven't detailed the maintenance of traffic that we're going to encounter throughout this project or things like that. But we anticipate it being a 3 to 4 year project. So if we start construction in 2027, we hope to wrap it up by 2030 or 2031 for sure. So, but again, we've got a long way to go to determine those details, and that's something we hope to present in future public meetings.
We have our next question.
Hello, my name is Sally Farms, and I live in the affected area. And I moved here because I wanted to live in a small town. I'm from Dallas, Texas. And they do a lot of construction lot of gangsters up here. My partner could not be here today, was not up to it. You know, who's being paid off to do this? Texas traffic is the same thing. I come here, I've been here 5.5 years, and not one car accident. I'm in Dallas, and just like the gentleman said about the speeding, and they say 75 on the highway, but they're going 90 or 100 to go on to the highways. My question is, has that been done? Has somebody gone down to another state that runs efficiently? Tell me, how am I going to get paid back? I moved here because I thought I was doing a good thing, and yet, you know, the population between 2000 and now, 2020, has not grown, it's decreased. So why the expansion? It will create more accidents. I know, that's why I moved from Dallas. I've had 0 accidents since I've been here, 5.5 years. Can somebody answer me that?
We've got a number of comments that were in there, but we do have questions. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, as far as the property takes, that was one thing we brought up in the presentation. We will not be taking any houses with this project, and that was something the consultant we really tasked and worked very hard on the last few months, and really looked into those tight areas and really tried to refine that. Because as you go through the process, I mean, we're starting at, you know, a 50,000 foot level, and as we're going through the process, you're narrowing down a little bit more, but sometimes you got to focus in certain areas. One of those areas that we really tasked them to focus on was the areas that could be potential house takes or full residential takes, which again, we will not be taking in houses, so there will not be houses demolished or required to be demolished as part of this project. So as far as your first concern, I can assure you that that's not going to happen. As far as some of the others, I think with the safety, we kind of already talked about that. Kelsey,
Yeah, it's just the difference of capacity in a city like Texas and whether we've had the opportunities to observe different types of traffics in larger cities and how it's handled. Yes, and I think to answer that, no, we haven't been to Texas or to a larger city to observe Texas capacity, but our community is, I think, specific, unique and needs evaluation in a unique way. Was there another question specifically that you wanted to?
Yeah, the population is not growing here, it's depleting. It's been 200 and some thousand since 2000. You see now, it's expanding.
And I think that one of the points that we need to focus on, or that we remain focused on, is that the traffic counts throughout this segment, whether the population is growing or not. The traffic in this segment is growing, and this is actually one of the most growing of segments throughout the I-475 loop, as far as traffic continuing to increase.
And to that point, when you look at the one, since we put a permanent traffic counter in, was that 2005? 2008. Since we've looked at 2008, you can go to ODOT TIMS, or is it, what is it, MDS?
We can get that provided.
Yeah, and there's ways to actually see that. You'll be able to see since permanent traffic counters went in, which is the most accurate traffic data we can get. We have seen an increase of traffic now in 2020 and during the pandemic. Overall, I mean, nationwide, there's a decrease in traffic, but there has been an increase in that section.
We'll go ahead with the next question. Yes, please.
Thanks. I think a lot of my concerns have been well articulated by other speakers, but two things I wanted to comment on. Questions. I suppose based on some of this is a bit of a community therapy session in terms of hearing grievances, and I understand you guys don't necessarily have direct answers for us at this time, it sure sounds like. But two things. One, I think there's a fundamental issue with ODOT's mission here, and we've talked a lot about, I think, it seems like you're saying you're projecting more truck traffic. I don't know if that's connected with the new bridge in Detroit or what, but I think it's established, and I like to think I'm somewhat like how able to put things together. It seems like the only way to explain the increased traffic is trucks in an area where the population is going down. That aside, my concern with the general mission is this. We live in a community where 38% of residents in Lucas County are obese. 38% additionally are overweight. 6 out of 10 have a chronic illness. The Ohio Department of Transportation plays a role in our built environment, which impacts how we live and work and move. When you look at some of the references to how are we going to reconnect our communities and our areas, you're just showing a bridge with a couple of trees. Really, you're just expanding the concrete river that is making it incredibly difficult to move across our community in any way other than a car. I bike often for transportation. We drive ride our daughter to daycare in the DeVoe neighborhood that's basically split in half by 475 as is. You've only got a couple options to get across, and it's going to be more difficult as it gets wider. And it sounds like we didn't necessarily even consider a reduction to make it more of a community space rather than really just a trucking avenue through the middle of one of the most densely populated areas of Toledo. And sadly, we don't have many of those left. And it's really, really disappointing and disheartening to see that. So understanding that's not really a question for you, that's a concern in terms of the connection to our community and viable alternatives, and the fact that we are an unhealthy population. And this doesn't do anything to help either one of those. To the extent moving forward, you can provide us some more details and more considerations in terms of how people outside of cars can actually get across our community. Incorporating that more into this project, that'd be greatly appreciated. I live downtown, and the 75 work there. It's very evident when you're not traveling in a car how difficult it is to move across our city because it's segmented so terribly by the interstates. I understand we need to have them as a practical reality in the world, but this is one avenue. If we look ahead 50 years from now, do we want our children and grandchildren to have a neighborhood they can move freely in and connected West Toledo? Or do we want another truck route when we already have 75, and then we've got the interchange down at the 23 corridor as well? So I think it's short-sighted to kind of sell the soul of a lovely neighborhood to a trucking route.
And I can address a few, I think, questions maybe in there. One is, I can tell you the department has more and more seen us invest in pedestrian facilities. So we have more and more grant money. Actually, a lot of the cities of Toledo's projects have that grant money. We have a lot of projects, actually a lot of the roundabouts going in, which are both safer, but they're also safer for pedestrians, or for some of the pedestrian improvements. We also want to work with our partners here, Metro Parks, City of Toledo, and others, to try to maybe, how do we go off the system even a little bit to provide some more pedestrian facilities. So that is something the department is very focused on, and it remains a greater focus, but I appreciate the comments.
For ODOT goes to human movement, bike and foot. So 0.5%, not very good. And that's lower than the national average. I think really half.
Well, thank you for the additional comments as well. They're definitely something to consider. We do have our next question up here.
Now, the gentleman in the back of the room has very good words to say about ODOT. However, I have a question that might not sound like it's a very good word. Some time ago, Representative Josh Williams reached out to ODOT's office in Bowling Green to organize a meeting between the I-475 Neighborhood Coalition and ODOT. The coalition agreed to the meeting. ODOT didn't. Why not?
Thank you, and yes, we did have communication with Representative Williams' office, and we did provide information to them, but I don't know that we interpreted it as a specific invitation to a meeting, so I do apologize, but I understand that there is an absence in that meeting not happening, yeah. Go. You may.
Couple of comments. We moved out here 4 years before the expressway was born, and it's been fine. I do a lot of traveling to Arizona, and all I want to say is, every time they widen a road out there, the traffic comes. It's like a movie. If they build it, they will come. So if we build more lanes, we're going to get more traffic. And that's going to be more of a problem. Signage would help. Go out to Arizona, go to any of the big cities around, and they'll have signs up that will say, exit, 2.5 miles. Next exit, 7 miles. You know, here you don't have anything hardly. People going eastbound, perhaps on 475, don't know that they need to go southbound on 75 to get to the turnpike. So why not try spending all this money on better signs and, you know, then everybody in the neighborhoods will love ODOT if you don't mess up our streets.
Thank you, and again, another observation of communities so that you're not nearby, but do it differently. Yes.
I'm Rick, and as you can probably surmise, I'm with that close to the project. Our mayor recently, first before getting in, the big rationale today for the project was his suggestion, and anecdotally, if you try to say that, tell anyone from any large city that this area is at any time, you just have to laugh in your face until you over on your back. And our mayor is, as I'm sure you're well aware, has opposed this project, and he has categorized the project as, and I quote directly, a solution in desperate search of a problem. And again, anyone in this room, I think you stand anecdotally will laugh. You'll laugh in your face. You try to pass off congestion as a prime rationale for this project. And along with the other data, we presented data as well to support this from the Federal Highway Administration Association, showing that this stretch of the freeway averages 1.2 minutes of delay at rush hour, 1.2 minutes a day. And to put that in perspective, that ranks of all people, stretches of interstate highway, whatever, ranks 8,664 in the United States. So it's yes, not first, but Bronx Expressway in New York City ranks first with average delays of 47 minutes. And we're here at 1.2 minutes of delay on average. And this is federal, I'm not making this up, this is data from the Federal Highway Administration. Yeah, go ahead. And it just laughable that that is a cause of congestion. I just think go along with it. Anyone else here? People already saying that as any urban planner or civil engineer with their salt will tell you, over the past 40 years, that freeway expansion, widening, it asks for more congestion. You can't build your way out of congestion. And I guess I would just like the panel to discuss this need when, again, it ranks 8,664 in the United States.
in terms of overall congestion. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick.
I don't know that specific rank. I mean, maybe it's somewhere in the study, and I'll just take your data for what it is. I will say, you do have, obviously, you have big cities. You brought up New York as one of them, Chicago, Los Angeles, many others. I think somebody brought up Dallas, and Dallas back there too. You know, the good thing with this, with our area, is we've been able to stay on top of it, and we've been able, and when we have issues, we're able to address it, sometimes better than a lot of those other cities, and that's what we're doing here. We have seen an increase in traffic. 75 is actually, I don't know if many know this, but 75 in and out of the south, I know we're talking about 465, but 75 is actually the lowest traveled per average mile route in the whole state of Ohio. So when you're looking at through interstates, so it doesn't include like 670 or 270 or, you know, some of these others but when you look at the entire section of 75, so we have a major corridor going through this area that is one of the most major north and south corridors. And because of that, that does mean that we have additional traffic that we have to deal with. But it's a major freight corridor for this area, but also for other areas. So I think, you know, again, this is a logistics area, but also I live in Lucas County. I don't want this to be a Los Angeles or Chicago or anything like that as well. So we want to make sure we're addressing this congestion. I don't know if there's any other.
Thank you. I do want to know that it's a couple minutes after 4 o'clock right now, and while we don't have a specific time limit on our question and answer sessions, we all will continue to be available and have a formal presentation again at 5:30. So I know that there are at least 3 remaining questions I have here, and here, and then we're going to hope for the best that we can get to those questions and then either move the conversation out in the hallway or continue to have dialogue with those who are continuing to be interested. But yes, sir. So our next question.
Yes, the imminent failure of this section of roadway, I think, is somewhat exaggerated. This is the finest pavement that I've ever been on in the interstate highway, much less Toledo. What is the remaining usable life of this section of highway? I have another question too. Also, when I asked about the options, somebody pointed out to a cap design and showed me a picture of Rushland Avenue. That's not the cap design that I've seen pictures of. The ones that I've seen have a mall area, a grassy wall area, where the neighborhood people can communicate clearly across. And I'd like you to consider that as your cap design and your options.
Thank you. Yes, we've heard the discussion or suggestion of a cap design before, but as we talk about the cost of projects, caps are absolutely significantly insurmountable cost in the form of billions of dollars in some cases. So to cap an entire interstate, I know would not be feasible, but I don't know if the panel has any other thoughts specifically on our exploration of these alternate types of ideas.
Yeah, I'll take the question about the useful life. So the underlying pavement subgrade, again installed in the late 60s. Typically we go for 50 years, so we're beyond the 50 year. What ODOT does do though very well is maintain their system. There's a lot of investment throughout the state of Ohio in maintaining the system. So the pavement that's out there looks good, operates well, and we're forecasting out to go into construction, as Dave mentioned, in 2027. So the next few years, continue maintenance, but after a time, that maintenance becomes excessive in cost. So there is a need to do what we call full depth replacement. So remove that subgrade, put in new subgrade, stone, pavement, and that will be necessary. You will see in a couple of years, likely, that with our weather conditions up here in Ohio, that pavement can deteriorate fairly quickly. And through we do geotechnical borings, we're starting to see some of that underlying support start to degrade. So this is planned, as we mentioned, this is 2002 that this study started to anticipate the eventual replacement and enhancement of the corridor. So, pretty soon you'll start seeing that pavement. There'll be much more maintenance required, and then it'll be cost prohibitive going forward. So I hope to answer your question there.
I have our next question. Okay, this issue that I want to discuss has not been brought up during this meeting, and I don't know if any of you are able to answer the situation, but my interest is the quality of life for this area. I'm a lifelong resident of Toledo, Ohio. I do live in the affected area, and what nobody's discussed is the construction and the demolition and pollution issues that are going to come up. I'm also concerned with the fact that these actions are based on the completion of the Gordie Howe Bridge, and they want to increase our truck traffic from Canada through Ohio. And I'm very concerned about the fact that the hazmat regulations that are currently in existence will all be removed. Now, I don't know how much television any of you actually watched, and the issue was a train crash in East Palestine, but God knows what these trucks are going to contain, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of increase in their traffic. So God knows what they'll contain, and what if just one of them blows up in our area? This is one of the most heavily populated neighborhoods in the Lucas County area. Are these lives not at risk? There's going to be noise pollution, construction pollution. We're at risk for God knows what with those trucks. And like I say, I know that the higher ups of international travel are more interested in money. But if they get more money, what if there's no people to spend on the products they want to bring through the area? So what's the danger to our area, and why isn't anybody going to do anything about it? Do we have local powers that can put on hazmat restrictions so that these dangerous materials don't travel through our area?
I can tell you I'm not a hazmat expert, and I will never profess to be, but my guess is there's probably, just like anything else, there's some powers that lie in the federal government, there's some powers that lie in the state government. With East Palestine specifically, I know there's been some movement on some of those issues, both at the state level and the federal level, but with railroads are a different issue. I know that's not what you're asking, but railroads are very protected by the federal government. But as far as hazmat, I'm not a hazmat expert, I couldn't tell you, to be honest with you. But when you talk about like the noise issues, there will be an air emissions analysis done. I think that's a proper terminology, as well as a noise analysis will also be done with this project to look and also look at mitigating factors. So.
Thank you. And you have had your hand up for so long. I told her I was going to give her a hand. I'm coming to you. And then I do believe that that's the final hand that I've seen up in the group. So I'm going to have here and then go there, and we'll see what happens from there.
Thank you very much. Just one quick question. Why aren't our elected officials here?
I'm here. I'm George Saraji from Toledo City Council. I've been here since 2:30. Thank you.
And I do know that other council members who are representative of this area are sent the invitation to our meetings and other stakeholder activities, but thank you for the question. Thank you, Mr. Saranto, for being here today. And I'm thinking that you're going to be the final question for this question and answer session. So, if you would like to.
I think I will be short too. Hi, my name is Marcy, and I live in the affected area. I just wonder what type of collaboration and coordination is going on between the Department of Transportation and our expanded public transportation system here in Toledo. They have gotten, the TARTA system has gotten millions of grants coming into them now, and they've been able to buy electric vehicles, expanding to flex now, which I don't think is very well given public relations, like seniors that live in this area can go all the way down into the Maumee, White House, Monclova area for $3 and also come back up to this area. So it's not just the Colorado area, it's really expanded in that to give a lot more Lucas County area public transportation, which will hopefully decrease in congestion and traffic. Also too, it's going to expand all the way out to Oregon, to that part of Lucas County. So we see a lot of possibilities coming within the next couple years, even before 27 comes, with this Department of Transportation thinking of building or other things. So what type of collaboration discussion is really going on between our public transportation system here and the Department of Transportation?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to break it up into two different answers. So what your initial or your main question is the collaboration between the Department of Transportation and TARTA, or it could be CODA in Columbus or what have you. One of TARTA's major grant sources is actually the Department of Transportation through money that we grant them. Some of it to buy some of those buses. Some of it's money from the state, some of it's pass-through money from the feds, but it goes through ODOT. So there is actually, again, we're a major funding source for some of those, especially more of the capital side of things, the buses like you were talking about. So that currently exists, and it exists, you know, regardless of this project. I think when we're talking about like the steering committee and stakeholders and things like that, is as we continue to go through the process of this project, what's some elements that we can incorporate from some of these other government entities, which TARTA is one of them, into this project to better connect the communities. But that doesn't necessarily just mean a bridge. That could mean more or upgraded stations and things like that. How do we work together to create an application or create a project that can also, you know, pinpoint some areas and address those as well? So that's how I guess I would break it down best. Is you got the department over here that is a major funding source for most of the capital side of not just rural transit agencies and more urbanized transit agencies, and then as well as with this project. But again, we're coming today not knowing all the answers, because we might be at a 50,000 foot view 3 years ago, and now we're at a 20,000 foot view, and we're not at a 100 foot view, but we're working through that. So I thank you for your questions and comments.
And Pat, I just want to add one thing. You know, that's actually a really good example for two different reasons. TARTA is an existing member of the steering committee. You might remember them as one of those that participate in different levels. So TARTA has been invited to participate at that level. However, that's a really good example of you thinking of somebody in our community who might not be represented as a stakeholder, and you bringing that idea to us, although they are on the list. If there are other groups like that, for those of you who might remember the beginning of the presentation almost 2 whole hours ago, there are opportunities that we might have missed. There are stakeholders in this room who want to be at the table, and so we invite you and encourage you to bring those names, bring those groups to our attention, help us understand the gaps that we have, and help us make this as robust as possible. Because even with the gentleman in the back who had the comment about healthy habits and lifestyle and things like that, we have tremendous opportunities even with how we might be expanding our bridges to add past pedestrian amenities. And yes, okay, so planters aren't really impactful like that, but widened multi-use paths or pedestrian paths and things like that, those are really pieces of valuable feedback that we're garnering from the public as you're providing it to us. So this conversation is far from over. We really invite and look forward to continuing this dialogue with stakeholders that haven't been identified yet and who have been on the list from the beginning. So we thank you for sticking around for this session. We hope that you'll stick around. We have, like Pat set up in the vestibule area, there are a number of display boards, there are different plotters, a number of project personnel who are looking forward to answering questions, to continue the conversations that we've started in this room. And then we have another formal presentation at 5:30, again in this room. We hope that while some of you may be interested in staying, we hope that some of your additional neighbors are going to be joining us as well. So thank you for sticking through this session. And you can see any one of us or any of the additional representatives upstairs if you have additional comments, questions, concerns, good, bad, and indifferent, that you might want to bring to us. So thank you all, and we'll be back at 5:30.